Okay, well, good morning. We've got an exciting session today. This is really where it all begins. You know, Louis gone through his ordeal. You know, the preparation and incubation phases of creative expression. Now we move to this time of great illumination. Louis, now at the age of just 34, ready to begin his training in a variety of ways, but all orchestrated, of course, by myself, Sun King. And you know, Louis moving to Amherst. You know, after his halfway house, he had to incubate for a summer, a couple of months, waiting for classes to begin. Anyway, so it's middle of August, and Louis moves. He has a friend drive him in a van. Louis got his bicycle, you know, that he bought while he was at the halfway house, a few books and some clothes and a tent. And he had contacted a group, intentional community in Shutesbury outside of Amherst, named Sirius Community, Sirius for the star. And some people, the nickname of Sirius Community was Findhorn 2. Because two of the members of Findhorn came to USA, Massachusetts from Scotland to develop a second intentional community. So Louis felt that would be a good place to begin. He exchanged some volunteer labor and a little bit of money to have the opportunity to camp there. And he figured that within 2 or 3 weeks, he would be able to find a place down in the city of Amherst to live. He'd look for a work exchange situation there. And he trusted, because he was moving there for all the right reasons, that everything would work out. It was interesting. It was kind of a rainy August, and it was challenging for Louis being in his tent. And it wasn't easy at first. His trips down to Amherst weren't yielding anything immediately as far as a place to exchange, you know, labor for rent. And because it was so rainy, he wasn't able as often as he would like to ride his bicycle down into town. So anyway, I think a couple of weeks went by and he was starting to feel a little anxious because nothing was happening. And it was interesting, it was on a Sunday, and there was typically a community meal where all the members of the intentional community would gather for like a potluck. And Louis was there with the group, and he was chatting with a fellow, shared a little bit about his anxiety because his time was running out, his money was running out. I think he had basically a week left. And his plan was to go down the next day, Monday, hopefully, if the rain stopped, and try to find his place. So he's telling the fellow about it and sharing his concern. And the fellow said, well, you mentioned you moved here to study A Course in Miracles. Is that correct? And he says, yeah, with Claire Ludlow at Harmonie Institute. It says, well, if you're going to be studying Course in Miracles, I guess then tomorrow you should expect a miracle. It was great, because just those little few words, you know, again, this was coming from me, orchestrated through the mouth of this man, expect a miracle, that of course everything was going to work out. And of course, Monday morning, the sun broke through the clouds and Louis is riding his bicycle down the mountain, and there's tears streaming off his face, just so filled with joy for the beauty of the morning, and joy because he really trusted that things were going to work out. And sure enough, within an hour or so, he had connected with this elderly woman, Mary, who was happy to rent out her basement apartment in exchange for some labor around her yard and such. So anyway, Louis was set up with a place to be. And once he was there, he would begin his classes with Claire Ludlow at Harmonie Institute. And it was a really fascinating process early on. Claire, being a therapist, she took a liking to Louis. And as I had mentioned before, Louis was very fond of both Claire and Ben personally, and they became like surrogate parents for him in the 3 years that he was living in the womb of Amherst, Massachusetts. Claire suggested after a while, because Louis was expressing his concern about the language of Course in Miracles being very Christian, and the teacher being Jesus, and she said, well, it's very common that us intellectual types tend to have issues with Jesus being the teacher. So she suggested that Louis do a few nights of lucid dreaming, where before going to bed, he would prompt his subconscious to focus dreams on his biological family. And the first night, Louis just had a dream, maybe a couple dreams. And the only thing that seemed significant, he had a dream about his 2 older sisters, but nothing else. But the next night came the dream that pretty much changed everything, or kind of encapsulated exactly what was going on in Louis's life, this transformation that was beginning in the womb of Amherst, studying A Course in Miracles. In the dream, Louis walking down Dolores Boulevard in a similar way as he had done in the past after his session with Rena Sirkar. He was very much in a daze, thinking like, oh my God, I can't believe this thing that she just told me about my life, my destiny, la la la. And so in the dream, he's in the same state of shock, trying to assimilate this prophecy for his life. When all of a sudden everything went quiet, the birds stopped chirping, and Louis had been in San Francisco long enough to know that, ooh, that means an earthquake. Sure enough, a very big earthquake started, and buildings were collapsing, and everything was mayhem, and fires breaking out from broken gas mains, and everything was just utter chaos. In this chaos, suddenly the shiny sedan, similar to what Louis's father had driven all the time as a traveling salesman, he always had the newest, shiniest car. This big 1960-something sedan pulls up and screeches to a stop. The back door opens. Louis can see his father driving, little sister between father and mother in the front seat, 2 older sisters in the back seat. There's his spot, the window seat on the right-hand side behind his mother. They're like waving in, come on, come on, come on, let's go, 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 go. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Just in that moment, it occurred to me, or to Louis, that it was going to be safer to stay in the middle of the bedlam of the earthquake than get in the family car. So the car door slams, the car speeds off, and immediately this rope ladder falls in front of Louis's face. Without thinking about it, without even looking up, he just reaches up and grabs rope ladder, and he starts getting lifted off the ground. He sees, all the mayhem and chaos falling away before him, and then he looks up and he sees someone waving to him outside of the body of the helicopter. Come on, come on, come on, climb up, climb up, climb up. And he does, gets near the top of the ladder, enters the body of the helicopter. It's a really big helicopter. The door shuts with a thump, and it's totally quiet, except Louis could hear the thump, 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 thump of the rotor of the helicopter outside. Inside the room, it's totally quiet. There's this big round room, the body of the helicopter, with seats lining the perimeter of the circle. All the seats are filled with these people looking up at him with these beautiful, sunny, happy faces, big smiles on their faces, eyes sparkling. They're like welcoming him, but no one says a word. They're just welcoming him with their smiles. And he sees one seat across the way that's vacant. He starts to head toward that seat, and then they're like, no, 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 no. But again, without a word, just pointing, I'm supposed to go forward to the cockpit. Louis is supposed to go forward to the cockpit. So Louis does that, and he sees the co-pilot seat empty. The pilot is, of course, flying the helicopter. And the pilot, without looking, just kind of points his head to the co-pilot seat. Get in, buckle up, get in your seat. So Louis gets in the seat. buckles in and kind of looks out the side window and sees again down below San Francisco in total destruction. But they're far enough away up high where it's, except for then again the rotor of the helicopter, it's very quiet. And the pilot turns a little bit his head and just says, "So, what airport do you fly out of?" And Louis is confused, like this guy thinks that I'm a pilot like him. And Louis just says, "Excuse me?" And the pilot says a second time, "What airport do you fly out of?" And he turns his head and he looks at Louis and he sees the look in this pilot's eyes. And Louis is like, "Holy shit, it's Jesus." He just knew, even though this pilot looked like the hallucination Louis had about Jesus was that he would show up in certain situations and he looked like Robert Conrad from the old TV show favorite of Louis, Wild Wild West, Robert Conrad. So with that look, he was obviously telling Louis that Louis didn't know shit from a shinola. He wasn't really asking him if he was a pilot. He was telling him that, like him, Jesus, Louis was a pilot. So imagine telling Claire this dream and she's like tickled pink, like, wow, like you're a good student. You got it on the second try. Like the dream was telling everything. This is what A Course in Miracles is. Louis had got it in a nutshell that Jesus, the teacher, was just a brother, a big brother. He's actually, in what I can share with you as Sun King, is that Jesus and I are exactly the same thing. That any of these quote unquote entities that are representing the eternal, speaking through some context or another, through a medium, through, in this case, it was a book that was dictated by Helen Schuckman. Okay, the information might appear a little different, but it's all coming from the same source. It's all pointing to exactly the same thing. And it's very important that you hear this, that there's only one source, okay? Oneness is oneness, it's all one. So whether that source or whether that representation of the source was Jesus or Muhammad or any of the ancient masters, or in modern times, we've had these different entities, Ramtha and Seth and Emmanuel, speaking through channels, and all of them are representing the exact same thing. And again, the language might be a little different because the medium, he or she that's transmitting the information, they're going to put, to some degree, their own spin on it because of their own indoctrination. So whether it sounds Christian or Buddhist or Taoist or just mystical woo-woo, that's irrelevant, okay? The key, and this would be what ignited Louis' study, that he would study all traditions. He would look for the same level of mastery everywhere, because he basically was being shown that it's the same thing. There's only one teaching. There's only one path, okay? And again, in the world, it could appear to be many, many, many paths with different flavors, but in the end, no. So the helicopter dream was huge. Louis totally was over his issue with Jesus. He saw that Jesus was his brother, and he would see in A Course in Miracles that Jesus was saying again and again and again this message that you who are reading this book, this listening to these lessons, you are the light of the world. You. So when Louis would be reading it, just like everyone else, there's 5 times the same dominant lesson repeated. I am the light of the world. My world is my creation. I only have one path of salvation for that world, and that's me. Not me, the person, but me, in Louis' case, Sun King. But Sun King, Jesus, it's the same thing. He easily could have later, this doesn't happen until later in his journey, picking up the name Sun King to represent his sort of personal representation, a messenger, but it could have been Jesus. It's just Sun King is more useful. And I agree. I think Sun King is a phenomenal name because it's more generic. It's more, and even there, there's even a lot of lessons, a lot of spiritual paths that would even say that, Jesus himself could have been named Sun King. Jesus, actually, many people would take a secular look at the story of Jesus and say it's really about the Son, S-U-N, not the S-O-N, Son of God, but the S-U-N, the Jesus's whole birth and the crucifixion and everything was, really about the pagan worship of the Son. Okay. We can get to that at another time, but really important in this context, in Amherst, Massachusetts, Harmonie Institute, A Course in Miracles, very soon after Louis began his study with Claire, probably after maybe the first season of classes, maybe by Christmas or so, she said, hey, teaching is an accelerated form of learning. If you'd like, you can teach with me. And one place that I would recommend you join me in teaching A Course in Miracles under the name of Attitudinal Healing is in the local maximum security prison in Northampton. It's like, Louis like, all right, let's do it. So Louis became Claire's assistant in teaching A Course in Miracles via Attitudinal Healing program started by Jerry Jampolsky in the prison to a group of inmates serving life terms for violent crimes, murder, rape, and whatever. So it was a fascinating experience for Louis to sit in a circle of very scary men and introduce these ideas about how they could change their mind, how they could change. They can't really change their lives, but they could certainly experience a transformation. It doesn't matter if you're behind bars where you are. In fact, later in Louis' story, he gets involved in a prison ashram project. And making a note to myself to remember that for later, Beau's book, and we're all doing time. Anyway, prison is actually a place where many individuals have a transformation because they don't have very many distractions. They're dealing with life in prison, but it's a very common thing. And many men, Louis was involved in this pen pal program, and he received some beautiful letters from these men, most of them Black men in prison in Florida State Penitentiary, that going through these remarkable transformations and in Islam as their avenue, at least many of them with whom he had contact, and just a beautiful thing. So I remember, in fact, there was the time that Louis was in the circle with Claire, and of course I'm watching all this, and Claire's asking the group of men if it was okay that they talk about love. And it was such a fascinating thing, because Louis was sitting next to this Hispanic man whose name was appropriately Jesus, and real scary looking guy, puck face and all that. And it was fascinating for Louis to watch these men, one, always put their eyes down to the floor when it came their turn to respond to Claire's question. And all of them said in their own timid way, and when Jesus did, his chin was trembling like he was going to maybe start crying, but that's kind of taboo in prison. You don't start crying. But they're just saying, yes, it's okay. We could talk about love. Just an amazing thing. Louis' heart just opened up for Jesus and thought, wow, anybody can be seen as your brother, as your sister, if you get to that heart center where you just realize that there's no difference. between this individual and myself. The only difference perhaps with Jesus is he had a little less cultural conditioning that kept Louis out of prison. But in the last session, talking about Louis's dark journey, there were things that happened with him where he might have been this far away from being in prison. So it's, matter of fact, there was that one time when an officer kind of found Louis in the situation, and a terrible situation. More or less, the officer rescued him and had him in the squad car, and he's asking Louis, "You appear to be a well-educated, white man. Like, why are you here? Why are you in this very, very, very bad place? like you should know better." But again, that was part of the dark journey Louis had to go through, so that one day he could sit in a circle of these men who had been swallowed up by the dark side, now serving life sentences in prison. So, again, that was part of Louis's journey, that he had to get that close to that life in order to be able to really appreciate, like, wow, but for the grace of God, there go I. So very fascinating time, like I say, with Claire and Ben, beautiful people. I'll put Claire's picture up in tribute today. She just passed last year, I found out. And yeah, so that was the core training, doing A Course in Miracles every week, several times a week with Claire. He was in a variety of classes, workbook class, text class, doing the thing in the prison class, so immersed in A Course in Miracles. Of course, also going to AA meetings, 12 steps, all the time, getting that loving support. And then Louis ventured out. He was very curious to find other places nearby in this part of the USA where there's other programs where people are on the path. Okay, so Louis spent time at the Kripalu Yoga Retreat Center in Lenox, Mass. He spent time at the Abode Sufi Center in New Lebanon, New York. Spent time at the Omega Center in Rhinebeck, New York, and both went through some programs at Omega and Rhinebeck, and also there was a winter program one year he went to down in Maho Bay, St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands. And this is an interesting story to share, because Louis went down because one of the teachers of that five-day retreat was George Leonard, who Louis became a big fan of. He had written a beautiful book called Education and Ecstasy, and just really talking a lot about an area Louis found very interesting, was sort of alternative education. And he'd gone through the program, Joseph Chilton Pierce, the whole workshop thing, Magical Child, and all of that. So Lou was really interested in education at another level. So we went down to hang with George Leonard for 5 days. But as always happens at Omega in these 5-day retreats, whether at the center in New York or at any of their other, I know they have other locations now, you can always jump from one, say they may have 5 different events going on, different teachers. And after the first day, you're allowed to consider switching. If the one you had signed up for wasn't the right fit, you can switch to another one. And this is what happened to Louis. He went down thinking that he would have this experience with George Leonard, and he found the first day George Leonard was kind of dry. He actually was into Aikido, and his presentation was more about Aikido. And Louis said, well, I'm going to check out another one of the 5 sessions, and one that he checked out was with Pat Rodegast, who was the channel for Emmanuel. And right away, Louis realized that that's why he went down there, to have this encounter with Emmanuel, because like like Jesus, Emmanuel, like me, the Sun King. Emmanuel was a pretty high level representation of the divine. And so Louis was in session with Pat Rodias, Emmanuel, for 4 days. And at one point, Emmanuel, speaking through Pat Rodias, invited anyone in the group to ask a personal question. And I should be able to remember now, but Louis can't remember what exactly the question was. And it doesn't even really matter, because the point is that the wording of his question, as presented to Emmanuel, was met with a response that was way beyond the scope of Louis' question. It went to the heart of Louis' soul. And this, again, is the ability that I have, or Jesus has, or Emmanuel, any entity that's representing the eternal knows exactly what the individual who seems separated from the eternal is asking. They're asking a question about home. They're asking a question about love, about safety, about again, this yearning that Louis was fully expressing, his yearning to be one with eternity, to be one with his own higher self. And so Emmanuel saw that and answered Louis in a way that just blew Louis's mind. Again, this was part of what this whole 3-year rebirthing process was about. It was really interesting that I think the last day, there was free time, of course, every day. I think you had morning sessions, and then the afternoon was free time. And Louis decided he'd always been very afraid. As a child, he had all of his traumas, and one of those traumas was around learning to swim. And Louis was not a competent swimmer at all. But he decided that morning that he saw this yacht anchored a few hundred yards offshore in this bay, and it's calm water, so it was inviting. And Louis just knew that it was appropriate for him to go for a swim, and he wanted to go out and swim around this yacht and then come back. It would, be a good 15, 20-minute swim. And Louis did it. And he was filled with this sense of peace, and he felt safe. He felt at home, even in a faraway place, St. John, Virgin Islands. But Maho Bay is a beautiful place. Anyway, so he's swimming around the yacht, and there's a dinghy, of course, a small boat, tethered to the back of the yacht. And he goes around the dinghy, and he sees the name of the dinghy is Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. So Louis just had this really complete experience. These 3 years were so magical in that, by the end of this time, and Louis had made a sort of a mental decision that he would commit 3 years full time to this process of just healing and growing and being fully rebirthed. And then at 3 years sober, which would be late in 1988, Louis would decide what's next. So tomorrow, the next version of today, we, Sun King, I, and you, we will continue the exploration of Louis's journey of transformation. It's a beautiful story. I'm so grateful you're here with us. Sun King sends blessings. I love you so much.